3 million years ago, when the first groups of early humans began to emerge on Earth, our protagonist was among them. At first glance, he appeared to be just another Australopithecus, but there was something distinct about him, an unusual obsession with hunting. The main character thought he was like everyone else, but he soon realized something was amiss. While those around him aged, weakened, and eventually died, he remained unchanged. No matter what happened, he simply wouldn't die. As eons passed, he stayed the same, well, not entirely the same. While time left no visible marks on him, his body continued to evolve, growing larger, stronger, and more powerful. The only things that sustained him during this endless passage of time were hunting, fighting, and battling anyone or anything he deemed worthy. Cursed with eternal life and unbearable loneliness, these pursuits were his only sources of joy. For nearly 3 million years, he lived this way, his body evolving daily, becoming increasingly formidable. Eventually, he reached an unparalleled level of strength, earning him the title of the God of Earth. His power grew to such an extent that he defeated every other deity, claiming the title of the strongest in the divine realm. However, as time went on, things began to change. With no worthy challengers left, his once thrilling days of combat turned into an endless stretch of boredom. To express his frustration with the monotony of his routine, he raised his foot and slammed it down on the ground. The entire dwelling of the gods, resembling a small planet, shook violently from the impact, causing the divine realm to tremble, leaving every god, angel, and even the malevolent beings within it terrified. This wasn't the first time he had caused such chaos, and some gods could hardly endure the daily disruption. Among them was Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Unbothered by the turmoil he was creating, the god of Earth was consumed by a thought that had tormented him for centuries. He had defeated every worthy opponent without breaking a sweat, and it had been over 1,000 years since he faced anyone who could challenge him. Letting out a deep sigh, he muttered to himself, "Being too strong is a problem." As those words left his mouth, a revelation struck him. After a millennium of frustration, he felt enlightened. If his strength was the issue, then the solution was clear: he needed to find a way to weaken himself. In his mind, it was obvious: if he had a frail body like the Earthlings, he would have countless opponents to fight. Suddenly, he stood up and shouted, "Dragonling!" Out of nowhere, a massive dragon appeared in the sky above him and descended with a thunderous landing. The dragon towered at least 5 times higher than God Mu's throne and seemed less than thrilled about being summoned. However, the glowing eyes of the dragon belonged to Dragonling, the top god's assistant. Changing his demeanor, the dragon let out a deep growl and asked why he had been called. To his surprise, God Mu simply began walking away, casually instructing Dragonling to handle matters in his absence. However, things didn't unfold as Mu had anticipated. Out of nowhere, the dragon cast a powerful spell, binding the Absolute, and boldly shackled God Mu in an attempt to restrain him. But the moment Mu turned his head and shot him an angry glance, the dragon's fierce and wild attitude melted away, leaving him frightened and ashamed. Stammering, the dragon attempted to explain himself, saying he hadn't meant to offend his lord, but that Mu should have at least provided an explanation, especially with a god's meeting approaching. Mu, however, couldn't have cared less about the meeting. Without uttering another word, he began walking again, dragging the dragon along as if the chains were nothing. Seeing his initial plan fail, Mu's assistant quickly shifted tactics, adopting a victim-like stance. He whined that if Mu didn't attend the meeting, he would be stuck dealing with the other gods' endless complaints about Mu's behavior. In response, Mu effortlessly broke the binding spell as if it were nothing. He turned to the dragon and shouted that he wouldn't go anywhere unless the dragon agreed to fight him right then and there. This was all it took to completely change the assistant's demeanor. Realizing that facing the other god's blame was far preferable to being torn apart by God Mu, the dragon immediately wished him a safe and brief trip. Mu smirked and walked toward what appeared to be a small version of Earth floating nearby. Stretching out his hand, he touched its surface and began to ponder whose body he should inhabit on Earth. To simplify his decision, he started eavesdropping on the messages the Earthlings were sending to the gods. Most were trivial and dull, but one particular message caught his attention. It questioned his very existence. Initially annoyed, it didn't take long for Mu to realize that this person was the perfect choice to start his journey on Earth. For the first time in 1,000 years, he felt genuine excitement. He had finally found a solution to his endless boredom. While Mu couldn't have been happier, his assistant looked far less enthusiastic. For a brief moment, Mu considered giving some kind of explanation before leaving, but true to his Sigma personality, he decided against it. Much to the dragon's surprise, he simply said goodbye, entrusted the realm to him, and told him to handle anyone who might show up in his absence. The dragon felt a mix of worry and frustration as he realized what was happening. God Mu was merely sending his soul to Earth while leaving his body behind. Concerned, the dragon tried to remind him of the risks. If something were to happen to Mu's body while he was gone, his separated soul would also perish on Earth. But Mu had already made up his mind, confident that no one in the divine realm would dare harm him. Despite the dragon's attempts to dissuade him with words, Mu brushed off his assistant's concerns and did what he wanted, as always. Without further explanation, the scene abruptly shifted. It wasn't Mu anymore but someone entirely different, someone who had just defeated the demon lord after a grueling battle. The feeling of victory was overwhelming, and the individual couldn't have been happier. But it wasn't real life, it was just the final scene of a video game that a player had finished moments ago. That player was a 17-year-old outcast named Lee Ho. Lee was painfully envious of the heroes in every video game he played, those fortunate protagonists who always managed to attract hordes of cute girls during their ridiculous adventures. As he stared at the game credits rolling on his screen, he couldn't help but sigh, wishing his life were anything like theirs. Lee suddenly released his phone, and it slipped from his hand, plummeting to the ground below in mere seconds. The device crashed loudly, shattering into countless pieces. It was clear why Lee Ho was standing on the edge of a 3-story building, ready to end his life. He felt he had nothing left to live for. His body trembled, covered in injuries, as he whispered a bitter farewell to this cruel and unfair world before leaping off the edge. As he fell, the wind whipped past him, and Lee screamed with tear-filled eyes, crying out from the depths of his despair, "If there's a God out there, now's your chance to prove it. Send me to another world." Before he could finish his plea, he hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood splattered everywhere as his head struck the pavement. By all accounts, he should have been dead. But then something strange occurred. Lee's hands twitched and shook uncontrollably, his chest heaving as he began breathing heavily, as if he had just been pulled from drowning. Unbeknownst to him, God Mu's soul had possessed his body in the blink of an eye, just before impact. Now, Mu was forced to endure the excruciating pain of Lee's broken and battered body, completely unaware of what had just transpired. Meanwhile, Lee's soul was transported to the divine realm. He stood there, utterly shocked, his jaw nearly dropping to the floor. What stunned him wasn't just that he was in an otherworldly place, but that he was face to face with a towering dragon that did not look pleased to see him. The shock was mutual. The dragon was equally taken aback, having not expected to encounter a human so soon in the divine realm. Similarly, Lee had certainly not anticipated that the first thing he would see after dying would be a massive, angry dragon glaring at him. Now, let's rewind and see what truly happened just 10 seconds before this entire incident unfolded. God Mu stood there with his signature smirk, lightly touching the surface of the mini-Earth before him. As previously mentioned, he was not the least bit concerned about leaving his defenseless body behind. He was overly confident, to a fault. The dragonling tried to warn him, urging him to think it through, but Mu, reckless as ever, brushed off the warnings as if they were nothing. Without a second thought, he sent his soul hurtling toward Earth, swapping places with Lee's soul. The very next moment, the unexpected occurred. As soon as Mu's soul entered Lee's body, he realized he was in a dire life-or-death situation. There was no time to adjust or receive a warning. He was mid-air, plummeting toward the ground at lightning speed. Less than a second, that was all the time he had to process the danger he was in. Then it happened. Lee's body hit the ground with such incredible force that it was almost unbelievable. The impact was catastrophic, bones shattered, and the body was flung backward like a rag doll before finally coming to rest. The pain was beyond anything Mu had ever experienced in his immortal life. But the pain wasn't the worst part. What truly overwhelmed him was the sheer confusion. Why did this happen? The moment he set foot, or rather, soul, on Earth, how did he end up in such a mess so quickly? None of it made any sense. His hands trembled uncontrollably as shock coursed through his borrowed body. But then, suddenly, everything went still. His hands ceased shaking, and in that chilling silence, the realization hit him: he was dying. There was no chance to change his fate, no time to fix what was broken. Just like that, his lifeless body collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving ground. The area was eerily quiet, with no one around to witness the downfall of what was once a proud and mighty god. No one to help, no one to even notice. However, this wasn't the end for God Mu, not yet. As you may know, some human muscles move without conscious control. These are called involuntary muscles, like the heart and internal organs. For Mu, who had spent 3 million years training his body, he had reached the absolute peak of understanding the human form. This allowed him to consciously control every part of his body, including his blood vessels and internal organs. Nothing was off limits for him. Just a few seconds after dying, his heart began to beat again. The pain was excruciating, even for someone like Mu, but by forcing his blood to circulate and repairing his heart, he managed to stop the bleeding. Slowly but surely, Mu began to rise to his feet as if nothing had happened, even though his entire body screamed in pain. Instead of feeling anger about the chaotic situation, Mu found himself oddly happy. Beaten up and covered in blood, he realized it had been so long since he felt anything like this. This sensation convinced him he'd made the right choice in coming here. His next move was to sift through Lee's memories to understand what kind of life this guy had been leading. It didn't take long for him to learn everything about Lee. With that knowledge, Mu decided to head back to Lee's home, his new base, to figure out his next steps. Surprisingly, Mu found it challenging to walk with Lee's weak and injured legs. So, like an ape, he used his hands for support, moving faster and taking some pressure off his legs. Not long after, he finally reached Lee's house. The first thing he noticed was that a cat had left a mess right in front of the window. As soon as he entered the small, basement-like house, Mu sat down on the creaky bed and began reflecting on what he had learned about Lee's life. According to Lee's memories, he had only one male relative, who lived far away. Mu quickly realized that the guy he had chosen not only lived alone but was also poor and utterly miserable. His only occupation seemed to be attending a place called school. What amused Mu the most was the memory of someone at school who seemed to have made it their mission to bully Lee. This person not only picked fights with him constantly but also went out of their way to make Lee's life a living hell. This was exactly the kind of starting point Mu had hoped for, messy, chaotic, and full of potential challenges. He couldn't be happier about it. Feeling a surge of excitement, Mu threw a random punch into the air to celebrate, but the moment he did, a sharp, unexpected pain shot through his right arm, as if the muscles had torn apart. Something was definitely wrong. Mu figured the pain in his arm was likely due to overusing his hand muscles while awkwardly crawling home. It became clear that this body hadn't seen much action. The first thing Mu noticed was that Lee had almost never used his arm muscles for anything strenuous, so even the simplest effort left them sore. Still, instead of feeling frustrated or angry about being stuck in such a weak body, Mu smirked. In fact, he was genuinely happy to feel pain like this. After thousands of years without it, the next day, police discovered the bloodstains and shattered glass at the site where Lee Ho's body had crashed to the ground. They quickly cordoned off the area, prohibiting anyone from entering as they launched their investigation. Meanwhile, Mu casually returned to the crash scene, not to check on the investigation, but because the three-story building nearby was Lee's school, and Mu had decided to keep up with Lee's daily routine. He strolled into the school, scanning the halls until he found Lee's classroom. His excitement got the better of him as he slid the door open with excessive force, causing it to rebound and slam back into him, leaving Mu momentarily stunned. His triumphant entrance was completely ruined. Muttering to himself, he stepped into the classroom, drawing the attention of one of Lee's classmates. The boy immediately frowned at the noise, shooting Mu an irritated glare and calling him an idiot, telling him to keep it down. Upon hearing this, Mu momentarily forgot the pain in his face and walked toward the boy, stopping right in front of him and standing uncomfortably close. This left the boy momentarily shocked, but it wasn't Lee's weak and frail appearance that surprised him, it was the unsettling, creepy smile on Mu's face. In that moment, Mu recognized the boy as the bully from Lee's memories, the one who had always made his life miserable. The bully, completely unaware that Lee Ho was no longer the same person, scoffed and mocked him, saying, "What's wrong with you, huh? Did you leave your glasses at home, or are you just too blind and stupid to act normal today?" Before Mu could respond, the boy swung his fist and punched him square in the face, as if to reassert his dominance over Lee. The punch landed hard, blood beginning to drip from Mu's nose and mouth, pooling on the floor beneath him. The bully smirked, clearly proud of himself, and taunted him again, "What happened to your glasses? Did you sell them for cash, or did you just lose them like the idiot you are?" Even with blood running down his face, Mu didn't flinch. He stood there calmly, unfazed by the punch. In matters of fighting, Mu had his own unshakable rules. A proper and honorable fight could only begin when all parties involved had willingly shown their intent to fight. Right now, Mu was waiting for the right moment to respond. Always ready to face any opponent, be it a god, a beast, or a human, his only concern was confirming his opponent's intent. Mu chose to confirm that intent simply by standing still and taking the first strike. That's exactly what happened here. After absorbing the punch, a familiar excitement and satisfied smile spread across Mu's face. Without hesitation, he sprang into action, interrupting the bully mid-sentence with a sudden punch aimed directly at him. The boy, completely caught off guard, took the punch squarely, just as Mu had moments before. But as Mu pulled his hand back, a sharp, unbearable pain shot through his arm. His muscles felt like they were tearing apart again, a brutal reminder that this was not his indestructible, godly body, but a fragile, weak human one. The commotion quickly caught the attention of the teacher, who stormed over, shouting angrily and demanding that they stop fighting immediately. However, the noise had also drawn the interest of the entire class, with heads turning, curious and intrigued by the sight of a fight breaking out in the middle of the room. The bully, feeling humiliated and furious after being punched by a nerd for the first time, could no longer contain his anger. Ignoring the teacher's shouts and the watching crowd, he charged straight at Mu, ready to unleash his fury. Mu immediately tried to defend himself, managing to block most of the attacks, well, kind of. While he defended himself, he couldn't help but think that he would have ended this fight long ago if his new body could actually keep up with him. For a brief moment, he considered using some of his godly powers, but to his shock, they didn't work. That moment of disbelief distracted him, and before he knew it, he took another punch to the face. At least this one wasn't as hard as the last. The bully was determined not to back down from someone he believed was still Lee, and he aimed to make him regret throwing that first punch. On the other hand, Mu found himself in a tough spot. He couldn't muster the strength to fight back with this weak body. Without punches, kicks, or his godly powers, he was left with only one option. In a sudden move, he lowered his head, aiming at a specific spot, and took the incoming punch directly on his skull. The bones of his skull were the only part of his new body he could rely on. Just as he expected, the bully's fist slammed into his head, causing the impact to break the bones in his fingers. The pain was so intense that the bully screamed like a baby, and in that moment, Mu couldn't help but feel like an absolute genius. To put an end to this ridiculous fight, Mu decided to capitalize on the bully's distraction before he could recover. This time, he rushed forward, grabbing the bully's hand in a sudden move. Without wasting a second, he used his head to strike, aiming directly for the bully's stomach, or maybe even his groin, knowing those weak spots. The bully was caught completely off guard, unable to handle yet another wave of unbearable pain. But Mu wasn't done yet. He wanted to ensure this guy would never forget this day. With another swift move, he raised his head and slammed it into the bully's jaw. This time, the pain was too much for the bully to withstand. His eyes rolled back, and he dropped to his knees in front of Mu like a defeated loser before finally passing out. All of this happened while the rest of the class stood there in shock, recording the entire fight. Watching the weakest guy in school take down one of the biggest bullies was hard for anyone to believe. But for Mu, things were different. He had just fought someone for the first time in thousands of years, using every bit of strength he could muster, and the feeling was incredible. However, now wasn't the time to celebrate. As his excitement faded, the pain from all the hits he'd taken rushed in all at once. He could taste the sticky metallic flavor of blood in his mouth. At first, it didn't seem like something even God Mu could handle easily, but it only took a moment for him to realize something surprising. He was more than okay with it. After such a long, hard time, it actually felt satisfying to experience. The thrill of a good fight lingered in the air. A few moments later, as Mu's excitement settled, he stared at the unconscious boy's body, feeling as if he wasn't quite done with him yet. He sat down next to the bully, and for some reason, perhaps due to the tough fight he had just endured, he thanked him. Then, in a completely unexpected move, Mu leaned in, lowered his head, and bit the boy's ear, causing blood to splatter everywhere. But Mu didn't just bite, he actually tore off a small piece of it and spat it onto the ground right in front of his horrified classmates. Shock filled the air. None of the students could believe what Mu had just done. It was akin to watching a madman. However, Mu didn't care at all about anyone's reactions. He calmly wiped the blood off his face, still glaring at the boy's body, which hadn't twitched even after losing part of his ear. This wild act of biting off the bully's ear was Mu's way of leaving a mark on his opponent, someone who had given him a fight he truly enjoyed. It was his twisted way of showing gratitude while also marking them as someone worthy of his attention. These opponents would later come to be known as Mu's playthings. It was clear that only strong opponents who provided exciting battles could earn a spot on this list. Back then, being labeled as one of Mu's playthings was almost like a badge of honor, a symbol of strength. Ironically, it was similar to how humans in some eras would mark animals to show they had been neutered, but Mu's mark was about recognition, not humiliation. Soon enough, the story of the second-year bully who got beaten by the weakest guy in school spread like wildfire. The most shocking part wasn't just that the bully got defeated, it was that he had essentially been neutered. The boy's condition was so dire that they had no choice but to call emergency medical services to attend to him. Like all the other curious students, Mu watched as they transferred Lee's classmate to the hospital. Of course, Mu didn't care about the bully's health. He was more intrigued by how they managed to call for help so quickly using just a mobile phone. As the ambulance drove off, Mu waved goodbye to his first opponent, hoping to meet him again someday. At that moment, one of the teachers, absolutely furious, appeared behind him and ordered him to follow him to the teacher's office. The moment they arrived, the teacher exploded, yelling at Mu and demanding to know if he had completely lost his mind. He wanted to understand why Mu had done something so wild and reckless to his classmate. At one point, the teacher's anger boiled over, and he attempted to hit Mu with the binder in his hand, but Mu didn't flinch. He didn't even move an inch. Not only was he unbothered by the threat of punishment, but he also looked excited, even thrilled, as if he were already contemplating the chance to fight another opponent soon. Seeing Mu's expression made the teacher reconsider. He stopped his hand midair, not wanting to risk the same fate as the student in the hospital. Instead of punishing him, the teacher turned around and told Mu, who he believed to be Lee, to bring his parents to school the following day. Mu had braced himself for the impact, expecting to be hit by the teacher, but when the anticipated punishment didn't come, he gave up on the idea of fighting back. Just then, the teacher dismissed him, saying he could leave school earlier than the others without elaborating further. Mu did as instructed and left the school, making his way to Lee's house. His mind wandered. Unlike other gods who possessed complete knowledge of the worlds they governed, Mu was uncertain about what the teacher meant by leave earlier. Was it a suggestion to return to his base, or something else entirely? Since nothing else made sense, he assumed it was simply that and decided to use this unexpected free time to heal from his earlier injuries and train his fragile new body. If he wanted to face more opponents in the future, he needed to grow stronger. His hand was visibly shaking from the pain he had sustained, and at that moment, he wished he could use some of his godly powers, like mana, to heal himself faster. As Mu understood it, mana was a force beyond the capabilities of most humans. In some places, it was referred to as chi or chakra, but most gods called it mana. In simple terms, mana was the life force that existed everywhere in nature, granting humans extraordinary abilities that allowed them to become hunters in some worlds, wizards in others, or powerful players in different realms. However, here in this world, Mu couldn't rely on it, no matter how much he wanted to. For now, he would have to endure the pain and focus on adapting to his new life and body. He tried once again to channel his mana, but it vanished within seconds. This reminded him of that moment during his earlier battle when he had also tried and failed to use it. Frustrated, he finally realized he needed to focus solely on training his physical body and rely entirely on it from now on. Before long, Mu arrived at Lee's home and collapsed onto the bed. Knowing that his recovery would take time and there wasn't much he could do about it, he decided to return to the god realm to see what was happening there. In an instant, just like the day he first came to Earth, his soul shifted back to his original body. As soon as Mu regained consciousness, his eyes widened in shock. Right in front of him, Li Ho was choking the dragonling, refusing to let the poor creature go. The weak boy who had always been bullied on Earth now turned to God Mu. As soon as Li noticed him, he released the dragon and approached Mu with newfound confidence, demanding that Mu hand over the dragonling. Li didn't know who Mu truly was. He had no idea he was speaking to a god. All he understood was that he was temporarily in this realm and would eventually leave again. He wanted to take control of the dragonling, thinking he could use it to dominate in his new life. However, Mu didn't appreciate Li's arrogant and commanding attitude. Without hesitation, he summoned a godly hand and tightly grasped Li, making it clear that he couldn't just order around his lord like that. Li was completely shocked. He hadn't expected this at all. But Mu didn't care about his protests or complaints and started dragging him away without a second thought. Mu had decided to give the boy a second chance at life in another world, but the look on his face suggested he had something else in mind. Minutes later, they arrived at the domain of Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu entered confidently, his firm step signaling to anyone nearby that he was there. Of course, there was no one else around except Lucifer himself, who, unlike Mu, was diligently keeping a close eye on his planet, Elmer. Mu marched straight into Lucifer's castle without bothering to ask for permission, walking in as casually as if Lucifer were just an ordinary guy. Lucifer wasn't pleased with Mu's rude behavior. Without giving them a chance to explain why they were there, he immediately rejected whatever it was they wanted, not even bothering to listen. But Mu didn't care about Lucifer's opinion in the slightest. He flatly demanded that Lucifer open the gate because he was about to send Li to the planet Elmer. As expected, Lucifer reminded him that Elmer wasn't Mu's planet, so he had no right to make such a decision. However, Mu wasn't having any of it. He leaned in and reminded Lucifer who the stronger god was in this scenario, making it clear that he could do whatever he wanted. To drive his point home, Mu added that if Lucifer doubted his strength, he was more than ready to prove it anytime, anywhere. Poor Lucifer knew he was no match for Mu, and he couldn't help but tremble in frustration. Seeing Lucifer hesitate and waste time, Mu stepped forward, deciding to take matters into his own hands. As he approached and touched the surface of Elmer's planet, Lucifer, caught off guard, quickly reminded Mu that interfering with another god's domain was strictly forbidden. He warned Mu that if a god not in charge of a domain touched it, an unbreakable barrier would activate, blocking all access. Just as Lucifer had predicted, the barrier appeared. But to his complete disbelief, Mu effortlessly shattered it in seconds, something Lucifer never thought possible. Shocked, Lucifer stared at Mu, who calmly remarked that the rules of the universe could be changed easily if someone truly wanted to change them. Mu then opened his godly hand and released Li, urging him to step forward and leap into the hole he had created on Elmer's planet. Li hesitated, clearly scared, but Mu reminded him that this was what he had always asked for, and now the opportunity was right in front of him. Once again, Li asked Mu to give him the dragonling so he could dominate in his new life, but Mu showed no intention of handing over his assistant and instead forcefully shot Li into Elmer's planet, sending him off to his new life. Afterward, Mu couldn't help but wonder why kids these days didn't want to work for what they wanted, expecting everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. With things settled and nothing else to do, Mu turned to Lucifer and casually told him to take good care of the kid before departing. On the other hand, Lucifer, humiliated and seething with anger, could only wish for the power to tear Mu limb from limb. Lucifer's story wasn't so different from Mu's. He was once known as the first demon lord in history, standing above all life on Elmer's planet after claiming the title of the strongest. In his arrogance, he dared to challenge the god who ruled over his world. In the first moments of their battle, Lucifer summoned a blinding light that transformed into a massive sword, far larger than the god himself, and hurled it straight at him. Even the god couldn't withstand the sheer power of the attack and was struck down, split in two by the massive sword, unable to dodge or defend himself. After defeating that god, Lucifer took his place but found it unsatisfying. He challenged every other god in the divine realm, defeating them one by one and claiming the ultimate throne as the god of gods, absolute, invincible, a supreme legend among them all. Before long, he earned everyone's respect, something he believed he truly deserved. But his days of glory didn't last. One day, Mu showed up and beat him, just as he had crushed all the others before him, completely destroying Lucifer's mighty image in front of everyone. Consumed by rage and humiliation, Lucifer vowed to get revenge for this disgrace, cursing Mu as a human-born bastard in his fury. Back in the present, Mu was casually riding atop his dragonling, heading toward his domain, completely unaware that something in the sky was secretly watching him. A demon, most likely sent by Lucifer, was spying on him to figure out what Mu was up to, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back, just like Lucifer, who was counting down the minutes for his chance to avenge his humiliation.